that kind of says something about our misconstruing our Eurocentric way of looking at mentorship being the older man and the boy, which in Greece, there's some other history to that people should pay attention to, right? Like, so just anyways, something important I think to point out about that is that mentorship in a more collective sense can be two-way and three-way. So you're learning from kids. You're learning from them. They are the voice of the future talking to you. They're like email from the future talking to you. And they are figuring some stuff out long after you stop trying to figure those things out. And if you're open to it, they will tell you, this is why I think this is so dope. I even think about people like Charles Cole, our homie. Charles is a little bit behind me by a few years, by more than a decade by far. And there are things I pick up from him. There's things he picks up from me. It's a two-way street. That's the collective. That's why I don't like this mentorship as me talking at you, me talking down to you, that Eurocentric way of thinking about it. It's more of that's why I called it human gardening. You are trying to fertilize the ground for people so that they actually can grow to be the people that God intends them to be. And sometimes they're older than you, sometimes they're younger than you, but the real act is making sure that you're paying attention to growing.
It is Freedom Friday and you are still not free.
Hello, it's another episode of Freedom Friday and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer after this hour with Ish, Sharif, and me. Today we're talking about the importance of mentorship with young Black men because there is internet conversation that persists. It's going on and on and on about why there are so many women in college, but there are so many fewer men in college. On HBCUs, there was a recent stat that came out that we've talked about, that there's only 19% of Black males on the campus of Howard University, which to me was a little bit startling and stunning because when I think about those colleges, I don't think of them as being as imbalanced by gender as they actually are. 19% is not very many Black males to be in historically Black universities, colleges, and universities. So when we bring up that conversation, it's good to talk about the numbers, but like, where do they come from? Black men come from somewhere. They come from Black boys, and Black boys come from somewhere. And it's a good conversation around what is being done for Black boys or to Black boys. In the book, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, you guys know this book. It says the needs of Black boys are identified as the liberation from internal oppression, which is called the ghost of the plantation. It's inherited trauma from slavery that shows up in low self-worth, self-destructive behaviors, and confusion about identity and purpose. Another one, number 2, is around positive cultural identity. This stresses the African-centeredness consciousness. These are things that we will argue about because many of us don't even believe in the Eurocentricity of the United States. We just feel like it's the default, and we are reprogrammed to not think about these things clearly. And then there's 2 more. Spiritual anchoring and moral clarity, and psychological sovereignty. Black boys must be taught how to resist cultural programming and reclaim control of their aspirations, their thoughts, their behaviors, not just as students, but as young men in a larger system built to contain them. Now, everything I just said to you, people are going to disagree with because many of us are Negropeans. So we're going to hear that type of stuff and we're going to think it's for somebody else. We're going to think, oh, no, just, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Just go to school. Just mind your manners. Just sit down. Just do what they tell you to do. Just, and I could keep going down the
Pull
line
yourself up and your pants up.
Pull your pants up, all
good.
that,
Everything
the pound
else
cake
is soft.
So what I've just described to you is carceral education. It's carceral, incarceral education. It's an education on how to be a prisoner to your psychological self, a prisoner to your skin, a prisoner to your color. And then when you aren't in college, people wonder what's wrong with you. So I want to talk today about mentorship, for one, because I don't know necessarily that I've ever been trained on how to be a good mentor. I do my best to be a door opener and a sponsor for people. But in terms of having a real mentorship philosophy to do my part, that whole each one and reach more if you can, all that, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about today about like the formal nature of that. What should we as Black men be talking about to make sure that the next generation, not even the next generation, that all Black men flourish because we're in the world. Anyways, there's a clip from TikTok I just wanted to watch really quickly because I think there's a brother that breaks this down in a way that makes me wonder about mentorship. So let's pull that up.
seen growing discourse over this topic over the last few days, and I want to talk about it. Now, this is going to be a little bit more anecdotal, but I want to show you something. Now, I'm mostly an educational content creator, and this is a breakdown of my following over the last 365 days. Roughly over 20,000 people that have followed me in the last year, and most of them are women on TikTok. I was mostly anecdotal, but I'm a researcher. I have an N of 2 because I've done the same on Instagram with roughly 20,000 followers. Again, mostly women. And that's also showing only gender. It's not even breaking down the race part. I can only imagine how many of those 20% of men are Black men. Now, I started this page with one of the goals being to show Black men what's capable. If you see a Black man performing well at the highest level and achieving an academic success that you may not have even known possible, it might encourage you to do the same. And I love that I have that goal, but you can clearly see from the points I just showed you that it doesn't always translate well if the audience can't find it. Now, again, in no way, shape, or form am I trying to knock on the women. I love you guys, and you guys are academic weapons. You are driving the economy, you're driving the country, and you're keeping things motivated, healthy, and stable. But there needs to be more men, especially my people, especially Black men, that need to be able to reach this academic success. But it's not really their fault that they're not there. I say this is all anecdotal because I also had a similar experience. I am a PhD candidate studying immunology, but I didn't even know what research was in high school. And it wasn't until undergrad where by chance I got into an undergraduate research program for minority students that showed me what research is. The reality is a lot of people, especially Black men, just don't even know it's out there. The accessibility for the information is not present. It is not a lack of discipline on their end. And that's something that we need to understand as a people. I know we could say it's happening to all men, not just Black men, but quite frankly, I only care about Black men right now. And that's who I'm to, because that is the representation I portray. Well, you say, how do we get that information out to those young Black men? I think it starts here on social media. There's very few educational Black content creators that I see, but if you see them, spread that message to that youth.
So you guys are educational influencers online. So take his message to heart and follow all the other educational influencers and the Black male influencers. I think there's a couple things that I pull out of this. Number one is it's also in our statistics that Ed post that Black women actually drive a lot of the traffic and the content. We've started pro-social Black father content a few years ago, and one of the biggest consumers of that is Black women. So when we look at our own numbers around education, a lot of it is driven by Black women. So that's amazing. But what are we doing with our platforms? One other thing I'll say is I had a mentor once, and I asked him, "Who mentored you? Like, what did your mentors teach you?" Blah blah. I asked him something like that, something aspirational, and he said, "I didn't have one." He's like, "I grew up in a time where nobody was trying to help each other. Everybody was like trying to scramble to get the best nonprofit jobs, and it was real competitive and whatever." And I was like, "Well, damn, that's tough." It wasn't like I didn't know it because you have a lot of 80-year-old nonprofit heads who refuse to leave, right? They refuse to let any young person come in.
They still got stuff to give, bro.
There's a lot of music in this old violin, Anyways,
the ages of hate on this Jordan already.
It is
we just
ageism.
started. It's early in the morning.
It's ageism on our younger people, is what it is. It's anti-young people. I don't want y'all getting my job. Anyways,
y'all not ready yet.
You're not ready. You're not ready. I'm 95 years old, but you're not ready. So I don't know what my best question here is, but the best I could possibly do with you all is if we had to talk about a style of mentorship, even if we haven't been as mentored as we think we should have been, what would it be? How would we do more than, the perfunctory type of stuff to be active and engage, and not just for ourselves, but to model for other people the culture of mentorship that we would want to have?
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think it's three things. First of all, it's funny, people can't talk without disclaimers. So you're like, women, sisters, I love you.
Did you see that? Did you see that?
Listen, like the disclaimers upon the disclaimer before,
I love
before
you.
It was like this. It was this tiny wording at the end or the bottom. Now it's up front, out loud in front before you could, bro, just talk to the brothers. Whatever. But that's so interesting, and it's not just him. I'm poking fun at him, but that is pretty pervasive now because everybody's super sensitive. They take what you are saying and they put words in your mouth. They twist it, blah blah blah, all the things. I think for me, mentorship is always just so interesting, just because how different people you know, uh, receive it, portray it, define it. For me, I think it's a couple broad categories. So one, I think a critique is I see a lot when I was a principal, people would come by the school, thump their chest, and say, "I want to be a mentor." And what they wanted to do was actually just lecture kids about things that they were interested in, and just like, "I'm putting you on." And they would make you sit through an hour-long lecture, even if the kid is like not even remotely interested in that. I think the beauty of being an effective mentor, you're actually mentoring something that they want to do. And you're like, oh, I see you want to do this. Here, let me put you down. Let me give you some game. Often they just wanted to turn the classroom into a barbershop, and just like lecturing kids about that. They're like, well, I don't want to be actually mentored and being that. Like, that's not my vision is here. No, no, no. You need to. So that's one thing. I think the other part of this is I think we can also learn, and I think it's too many times we learn from this, but the anti-mentor, how not to be. So if those doors are closed, you hear a lot of people say, you know what, I learned what not to do because it was done to me. And I remember how it felt, and I don't want to pass that kind of, feeling on to others. And for me, how I was taught about mentorship, particularly if it's this aligned vision, is you're training your replacement, and you actually want your replacement to be even better than you. If it's mentorship and you're just like, I'm gonna give you just a little bit, or I'm gonna give you a little game, it's very different orientation. If you're like, no, I want you to actually be better than me, better than I even imagined, right? Like, then that's a different type of fervor and love and pouring into, as opposed to, well, I'm going to give you some, but I'm not going to tell you all the tricks because I don't want you to outbest me. I don't want you to compete with me, right? Because it's a removal of ego if you're going to be an effective mentor, to the fullest degree, right? Like it's a removal of that, and essence, what you're trying to do is help that person shrink their blind spots, and you're shrinking your ego. That's where this beautiful connection can come. But you also defined it a while back, Chris, where it was mentor and sponsor. And to me, I hadn't heard it framed in that way, and this was years ago. And to me, that was always just a great reminder for me, like the difference between even mentorship and sponsorship. Because mentor, you can, we all learn from people who don't even know us, right? I'm like, yep, that's my mentor. And I used to say when I was younger, I'm like, man, I'm the most mentored person I know. But I was also receptive to mentorship. I wanted to learn. I want to hear, like, how did you do this? I remember when I first started writing, I was like, Chris, like, what's considered a good blog? Like, how long should it be? Chris starts off like, well, I'm not really like, Chris is mentored, sponsored, open doors, kick doors in, for others, like, incessantly. So I can't even remember all the questions I've asked him over the past decade plus. To me, that's mentorship, He's like the big brother I never had, the older brother I never had. You know what I mean?
I look good, though. Y'all can keep calling me old if you want to. Keep calling me old. That's all right. What's up, Ish?
Yeah, no, I'm the same way, and just to veggie back off of what Sharif was saying right there. Like, I feel the same way about
the veggies,
y'all.
Bro.
Yeah, we don't eat that swine around here. But
yo, I can't stop giggling every time
we do bacon.
I remember, look, we were in a public setting when he first said it. I was like, what?
Yeah, it sticks with some folks. But yeah, no, I would say there's also a contradiction, right? And this is where I wrestle with the concept of mentorship within our context, right? So, there's different programs, and I think you alluded to this earlier, Sharif, like that want to come to schools and mentor kids, but for the most part, they're just really there to either do their hours for their job if they work for like a Pico or something like that, not to name drop any places. And they just want those community service hours. But they come there and their mentorship turns into, this is how you get money. This is how you make things, right? Fulfilling egos. Exactly. And so when we see that is damaging for a kid. So I remember even when I was, when my children were younger, my oldest son at his local elementary school, they're like, oh, you want to sign him up for mentorship? And I was, nah. I was like, what are they going to be talking about my child about? What are they going to mentor him on about the important things in life at such a young age? And I might be overly protective with that, but I also know the kind of mental poison that exists in many people's concept about what it means to be successful in this society. And I'm not saying don't go and strive to be successful in the best you can. Shoot, that's what it means to really be what this is all about, right? But at the same time, you need to understand the game. You need to understand how the world works. So for me, I always point to, who was your mentor? What intellectual tradition do you come from? Right. So like, if you ask me, I could tell you like Dana King, right? I can tell you, Melvin Garrison. I can tell you Sharif El-Mekki, you know what I mean? And that list goes on. And that mentorship and also that intellectual foundation, I think, shows the full grasp. And so you can go back, you just ain't come out of nowhere and turn around and be like, yeah, I'm here to teach the kids, all this nonsense about what it means to be successful in this burning house, quite frankly. And I think my experience with successful mentorship as an educator, but also, with my own sons in the community and everything, has always been connected to being honest with them about the reality, but also being very supportive of their dreams and allowing space for people to mess up and make mistakes, and then allow themselves to dust off and have that conversation and go back to the drawing board. And I think that's really what mentorship should be all about, being that support for folks, but still at the same time providing insights and wisdom in which you have gained throughout time that others have bestowed upon you also.
Yeah, real quick, it's I think that intellectual and cultural and even spiritual often genealogy is really important when we're choosing mentors. And I think the mistake that we make as we gain a little bit of knowledge and people are looked at as mentors. One, people, Charles Barkley is usually talking foolish, but when he says like, I'm not the mentor, like, in that kind of sense is right. But I do think the thing that mentors forget the most is mentorship is usually more about listening than talking. And too many people equate mentorship with just flapping their lips and just talking incessantly. Mentorship is about listening, because even all of your experience, it may not fit into the contours of the path the mentee is traveling right now. So you also have to listen to see what's going on, what's happening, and where they headed. And most of that we don't know quite yet. You know what I mean? So it's like that piece I think is just so important. And sometimes it's hard because if we feel like we've done this or we read this book and the kid is now reading the same book that we already read, we're like, da, da, da. But there may be messages that we missed in that same book, right? Because we even read the same book, or all of us read Malcolm X autobiography multiple times throughout our lives and picked up something new. And that's reading the same exact words, let alone a new set of eyes, brains, experiences, and perspective reading that same book, right? And so I think a part of it is listening, and I remind myself, as I remind all of us, that mentorship is about listening even more than talking.
So let me try and introduce a couple of concepts here and test them on y'all and see what you say.
All right. So this means controversial.
It's not controversial.
Concept.
I'm just trying to I'm being intellectual, so I'm trying to expand my normal view. There's a very Greek view of mentorship. There's a very European, and it is very much age-based. Like, I look down on you. I am the man. You're the boy. Blah, blah, blah. It's a very Western, I think, sense of individual mentorship, one-to-one. So first of all, let me just start by saying Juwanza Kunjufu in countering the conspiracy against Black boys. There are just some things I would point out. I got some notes. So he says this is what Black boys need by developmental stage. Age infancy to 9, they need early childhood nurturing, cognitive stimulation, and fine motor and language skill development. And oftentimes, Black boys are penalized at each one of those things that I just said, either by circumstance or by system. They are not getting what they need. 9 to 13, they need positive role models and academic interventions. There's more. I'm very, very simplifying for people. Go read the book. 13 to 18, they need combating hypermasculinity and street culture. a determined effort to do that, to get boys to manhood in a healthy status, because there's pressure from media, from gangs, from other things in life that will take them off track, and they need social emotional support. 18 to 25, they need purpose and direction. So all these things that I just mentioned are human development things that don't lend themselves to me showing up and talking at people for a period of time. So so here's the two concepts I'm going to enter, and literally just thought of this as you guys were talking. The first one is mentorship isn't one-to-one. Mentorship is like collective parenting. So I had a mentor who said to me once that community is, what do you say? Community is the way that people behave when they feel as though they belong together. And I never really knew what he meant about that. But when you feel like someone's family, you treat them differently. When you feel like they're connected to you in some way, they're not foreign to you. So you're treating them in a way like a cousin or a child, whatever, your own child. I say this because growing up, I used to have this habit of inviting myself to people's houses and staying over. I look back on it, it's so funny. I just literally would just invite myself to sleep over at people's houses all the
Wait a minute, how
time.
old were you, bro?
This happened, I would say, probably 9 to 15 in that group. I could find on any given weekend, I could find myself at a variety of different houses. And I got to the point where I liked the food in different houses better than the others. And some of these were people that were family, and some of them were
Right.
just community extended family. Like we called each other family. And in each one of those places, there was a Black dad. So this is it's so funny to me looking back. Um, a lot of what I know now came out of independent conversations when I'd be over at somebody else's house with their dad. Now, of course, I have my own father, but there's this range of, like, one of them I can remember was a doctor, one of them was a musician, one of them was an accountant, one of them was like a community elder type who would just do stuff like in the community. And each one of them would say, like, young brother, you need to, this, that, or the other. Let me show you something, whatever. I'll give you one example. I had a very closed music palette. One of them introduced me to Bob Dylan. And I remember just thinking, this sounds crazy. What is this? And he gave me this long kind of talk around, why Dylan was important, but whatever. I just thought it was weird because that wasn't part of our life, but it was something he introduced me to. It opened doors. It extended me. So I think now they were gardening me. This is like human gardening, right? This is like collective parenting. I was not their child, but in the 5 minutes that they had with me here or there or whatnot, they slid things in that actually you would only do if you cared about your son's friends. If you cared about your kids' friends when they're over at your house, you would take a collective interest in, I'm doing my own fathering here, but I also have some surplus fathering to give. If your friends are going to come over here and I hear them say something crazy or whatever, we're going to engage, right? If you don't care about other people, you don't have to do this. But I'm just wondering around this idea. There's so much like in the Kwanzaa principles around collective stuff and thinking about village and village building and all that type of stuff. We talk about these things rhetorically, but what do they mean in reality? I'll give you one last example. One of my friends, his dad was the owner of Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles. His dad was he was one of the first Black entrepreneurs that I met. When I was over at their house, I would always ask my friend Terrence, I mean, what does your dad do though, right? Like, because, at that time I'm thinking about people need briefcases to go to some place and sit in it, and here was a brother
Briefcase or tool,
yeah, or some
right?
tool.
Like one of the two, yeah.
But this is a brother that owned a very successful restaurant, whatever. So I told him, like, I'm a good cook or whatever. And he's like, really? Blah, blah, blah. He let me cook something that night. I was going to make soup. So I made mushroom soup. And all I put in it was salt, pepper, and mushrooms in the water. As a kid. But this is the funny part. Looking back as an adult, the funny part is he gaslit me so hard because he told me it was so good. He gaslit me so hard on it. Brother, this is really like you really doing something now. You should learn a little bit more. But turns out, 15 years later, I'm working as a chef, as a line chef, right? And thinking to myself, like, this brother gaslit the hell out of me. Made me think he knew what he was doing, right? But anyways, I say that to say him and another brother named Mr. Dumas, one of my school friends, he also was an entrepreneur. He owned a series of salons. Each one of them, though, had a purpose in my life, and it wasn't one-on-one. They felt like family members. They didn't feel like they were trying to be my teacher or my mentor. They just felt like they were taking an interest. It was normal to take an
It
interest
was
in
almost like
pieces.
casual
That's
conversation,
exactly
right?
what it
Like
was.
it was sharing, not the browbeating. Because I
Yeah.
think that's what
No.
a lot of times our kids get. That's the mentorship. I'm gonna beat this into you, even if you know what I mean, got different taste
Mm-mm.
of. I mean, the one thing that this also gives more sunshine to, two things about you, Chris. One, your infatuation with the Waffle House and Roscoe. I'm like, okay, that paints a
Bruh,
little bit,
stop it.
adds some. And then on the other side, this whole Prince thing, and the music mentor, trying to open you up beyond. You still ended up in Minnesota, but like you had this. He's like, come on, bro, not Prince, like Bob, just anything, anything else he was adding to it, but. Fascinating.
Which was crazy though. I mean, like I was like, who is this white man? All your albums would be black
Right.
people, right? And here he
Mhm.
is saying, no, you got to listen to this album, young brother. And he'd be like, who is this white man? He's telling. And then when he puts it on, y'all know what Bob Dylan sounds like, So,
Not quite, but I mean, I know the
bro, it
name.
sounded like extra crazy to me because he's not
Okay.
a singer.
Okay.
He's kind of like a
He's like a
poetry
talker
singer or
or
something.
something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
He
yeah.
talks over it,
So I
yeah.
was like, what the hell is this? And then I started, really digging in and who it is and whoever. I don't know if you saw the part in this movie where it's Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and I'm missing Sam Cooke, and there was a
And
fourth one.
One Day in Florida or something.
Yeah, there's a part in there where Malcolm X puts Sam Cooke on the hook and says, "Why aren't you writing stuff like this? It's a Bob Dylan song." And he's saying, "Why aren't you writing stuff like this? Why are you doing all that dancing and that pop stuff or whatever?" And that's where Sam Cooke came up with "A Long Time Coming." The song "A Long Time Coming." It was because he was put on the hook to write a social protest song by Malcolm X, and the song that he used was "The Times Are Changing." I think it was
I
by
was
Bob Dylan.
born by the
This is it.
river. I
Right.
can't
So that
sing.
song right there is a protest song by
We get the
Sam Cooke
point,
that he
Ish. Don't
wouldn't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
done. Right. So, anyways,
No,
I know
but
I'm off topic here. So,
no, but that's deep because and I strongly suggest the Sam Cooke documentary if you've never seen it, but because he dies mysteriously, right? Soon after that was released. And he starts thinking about other independent type of music endeavors. But he also, the part in that song when he's like, I go downtown and they tell me not to stick around, right? That was banned in the South. They clipped that part out for like a couple decades until it was put back in. Yeah.
Now, see, listen to all I know from one brother just taking an interest in making sure that I wasn't listening to just LTD and Cameo and Slave and the stuff I was listening to back then. Yeah, don't y'all laugh at Cameo,
No,
bro.
I could
That's like the
see the
world's best band
rhinestones
ever.
on there.
Stop
Everybody.
it. Stop
How
it.
can we not laugh?
Bro, there's no better funk band than the Cameo. Let's just stop. Let's stop pretending. But anyways, he just wanted to expand my world a little bit because if you would have looked at my album collection at that time, it was 100% stuff like Cameo. And here he is like, no, there's, expand your world
There's
a little
more.
bit.
Yeah, I mean, but again, juxtapose that to how, I mean, and this is self-critique, how I talk about, millennials and Gen Z's music, right? Like it's never casual. It's never unbiased. It is a very clear line. There's no gray. That's hot trash. This is when music is good. You know what I mean? So, but there are other ways to just invite the conversation, also learn. My mom wasn't, growing up, it was Bob Withers, Stevie Wonder. That's what my memory is. Weekends cleaning up, and I remember when I first started talking to her about rap, and it was Double Dutch. The Double Dutch bus was like the first thing, and I thought this was like and she wasn't like, but she wasn't. It was easily she wasn't interested. It was obvious she wasn't interested. Public Enemy was the first time I felt like we were actually engaging in a dialogue. And I still remember that. We were at my great grandma's house, and I'm like, this new group. And that was the first time I remembered distinctly that she was like open to engaging in a conversation where before it was just like, yeah, all right, like we got somewhere to go, but this time she actually sat down and we were conversing about Public Enemy and Chuck D's lyrics, right? And so I think, and it felt different. It just felt like, wow, like, I'm sharing something with my mother, who I just felt like knew everything. And I felt like I was educating her about something that was near and dear to me, which was it was just a different feeling.
That kind of says something about our misconstruing our Eurocentric way of looking at mentorship being the older man and the boy, which in Greece there's some other history to that people should pay attention to, right? Like, so just, sissy. Anyways, this is protected by the red, the black, and the green, with the key. Anyways, something important I think to point out about that is that mentorship in a more collective sense can be 2-way and 3-way. So you're learning from kids, you're learning from them. They are the voice of the future talking to you. Like their notes, they're like email from the future talking to you. And they are figuring some stuff out long after you stop trying to figure those things out. And if you're open to it, they will tell you, this is why I think this is so dope, right? I even think about people like Charles Cole, our homie. Charles is a little bit behind me by a few years, by a decade or more, by more than a decade by far. And there are things I pick up from him. There's things he picks up from me, right? It's a 2-way street. That's the collective. That's why I don't like this mentorship as me talking at you, me talking down to you, that Eurocentric way of thinking about it. It's more of that's why I called it human gardening, right? Like you are trying to fertilize the ground for people so that they actually can grow to be the people that God intends them to be. And sometimes they're older than you, sometimes they're younger than you, but the real act is making sure that you're paying attention to growing, like growing yourself and growing others at all times. I don't know. What do you guys think about that as a concept so that we get out of this one-to-one thinking about mentorship?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think, that was a George Benson song, you teach them well and let them lead the way. Not when they're gray hair.
People know this is an old ass podcast right here, right now.
I'm a millennial. I don't know about y'all, man. I'm a millennial.
Listen, look, the Gen A is gonna say you old. You know what I mean? Like
I am unk status now. So.
You are old head. You are unk moving into old head, moving into elderhood, right? Like that's the journey. But the fascinating part about it, Chris, like I 100% agree, and this is why, like, when you think about like, just African centeredness in this concept, there's 2 ways that children are looked at a lot of times, right? Like it's one, they're closer to the future, as you said, but there are a lot of cultures that looked at children as closest to the ancestors too, because spiritually they were in commune and conversations with the elders on the other side, the other realm, then they're here with us. And they're able to see, right? Like, so it's this circular kind of notion anyway, right? Like that they have something special. This is why you get people who are, right, like, listen, beating the crap out of kids and saying like this is to help them is anti-African, or they're like, oh, African. They're like, oh, things that you learn from the European way of disciplining children or hatred for children ain't the same thing as what we used to do, because they actually looked at them as like just spiritual royalty, and a child that's captured in this space, that they are messengers for us, and through them, we're understanding, right? Like, and so it's this deeper philosophical and spiritual way of engaging with children and youth that in a lot of ways we've lost. It takes longer, so we're looking for the shortcuts. We've been the crap beat out of us, so then we turn it around. We say, oh, I've been disrespected by all these white people in my life. I ain't gonna be disrespected by, somebody that looks like me, or especially young, right? Like, and so we're taking all of this trauma, and sometimes when in essence, we're not honoring what the youth represent, what a child represents, and framing our life and our mentorship and menteeship in a just a different way, man. It's just a different perspective, another way to look at the youth, at children. And it's not always easy, right? Because some of the stuff is like crazy. This is madness. But, we also have to look at like, what was our role in playing? What part did we play in creating the madness that they're just reflecting back to us?
So let's take the sum total of everything we just said, everything that we all just said in this half hour. How is this a way to solve the problem of Black men disappearing from spaces where they used to be, like in higher ed, or in certain professions or in certain places. There's a sense that Black men are vanishing in some places where they used to be. And there's almost like an urgent call to y'all better go rescue them or find them because, like I said earlier, 19% Black males at Howard. What does that do? I mean, the number of people family formation that meet in college is huge, right? The number of people that meet in these type of common places where we exist, that's family formation in some ways. Now you got 3/4 of women. Well, first of all, young brothers, just let me tell you this much right now. If you want to improve your chances going to Howard, the ratio, just the math works in your favor in so many ways right now, right? Um, but there's a serious question here: is we talk about the problem, and now what's the solution? And I said the solution is not in manhood; it's in boyhood, right? Because Black men come from somewhere. So I'm thinking, okay, well then, what does it mean for us if we want to do something for young Black boys that keep them on the path to being in the places that we say they're vanishing from? Is this even possible? I feel like I'm just talking aloud here. Is this even possible to fix this? Is this just a thing? We're just not interested in some ways. We just dropped out. We're just not interested in some stuff anymore.
Well, I wouldn't say interested, right? I think a lot of times folks aren't exposed to certain ideas that we talk about all the time and take for granted, right? I also think there's, like you were just saying, and the dude at the beginning from the TikTok video, kind of like internalization of what a Black man is through white lenses. And so in order to be Black, this is what, man, this is what it means, right? And an overemphasis on like simply getting, getting money without any meaning or purpose behind that. I think that is a lot of the things happening right now where people, a lot of brothers, man, have internalized this idea that, in this society is going to ever look at you as an equal. And folks need to get over that. And our ancestors used to know. And just to tie back to what you were saying, Sharif, before, children being brought up in those different cultures on the continent had a responsibility to the ancestors also. So they were taught from a young age what the responsibility is. We don't do that here. In actuality, we do the opposite. We tell you this is what it means to be who you think you are. And guess what? It's that framework and that perception was developed by your enemy. And your enemy says you're like this. And if you're not like that, then you're not enough. And Tupac used to call it hocus pocus, talking about, well, if white folks are going to fear me for my hocus pocus, I'm going to use that against them. And you don't think like a 14, 15-year-old, like a 14 or 15-year-old, like look at their teacher or like a white person and they're like afraid of them when they're still a child. You're afraid of me because of what I look like or what I talk like or, what it means to be this. And that hocus pocus is real. And I used to pull my students' cards all the time about it. But that's the conversation that needs to be happening collectively with our folk, man. We don't need conversation simply focused on the lack of spiritual, material accumulation. We need a much more go back to the roots of what our folks already knew. The responsibility to the ancestors, the responsibility for the future, right? And then have that embedded in the very, very fabric of what we're bringing our children into, and that doesn't exist.
What's the hocus pocus?
Hocus pocus is fake stuff, man. Like, it's like you
like
think
Lil Wayne?
Yeah, like you think I'm something that I'm not, but I'm going to use that idea of me that makes you afraid of me against you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of young brothers think like that at a young age, man.
Do you think the ship sailed on the whole Afrocentric thing?
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if that was the case. I think it's lack of exposure. I think it's lack of exposure, man.
I'm trying to think about young people, though, if they hear that, all the stuff around the ancestors, the continent, the Pan-Africanism. I almost feel like there's a pervasive feeling amongst young people that's like old folk stuff. That's like, that's like they see that stuff in like black and white photos. They don't really see that in, nobody's assigning Frantz Fanon in high school. Well, see, that's you trying to get fired.
Not
So
the
that's
ones who,
just, you
the
just
ones who are canceled, on the to be canceled list, still do. But I think, I think, but we talk often that a cultural revolution is needed, and education has to be central to it, right? And so we can teach about Pan Africanism, Black nationalism, equity, but I do think we have to also marry it to where kids are. We can't talk like it is the 60s, because it's not the 60s. And I think that's, part of like our generation's piece where, sometimes we get, I know that is my, like one of my favorite times to read about, to think about, you know what I mean? I remember I used to tell my parents, man, I wish I was your siblings instead of your child. Like, to me, like that was just like a burn, like that I think even held me back in some ways, because I was just like, you know what, this time period sucks. Like, this is the worst time. That was the time of movement and action and change. When how my father and, particularly would, correct me on that, is like, nah, every time is a time for change. It's just, you got to be in tune with what's the tenor of the time, and plug into it, as opposed to trying to make the time plug into, Angela Davis talks about this. She's like, yeah, you're always like, oh, I want to do it. She's like, no, look at what we did, apply the pieces that would work, can work, or even just think that inform your new strategy. She's like, the old strategy is old strategy. It's not, it might be strands of it, but it ain't, you can't just overlay that onto today or tomorrow. And so I think that's where the engagement has to happen differently with the youth, because I do think they're interested. Like, who wouldn't? It's never passe to create a time and space where you're fully human. It's never passe. It
you
will
know what
never be
though?
passe.
See,
But
you're
like
all
how we
saying this
talk
like,
about it has to change.
you listen. I'm not taking this from you. I'm not taking this from you, because you grew up with two parents that they might as well have been light years ahead of everybody else culturally. Now, I'm going to give you an example of this, right? So in Philly at Lowe's Hotel, I talked to your dad a couple years ago, about 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, in one of the conversations I had with him. And in that 15 or 20 minutes, I walked away with enough to think about reordering mentally some of my mental models in the way I was thinking about my own dad and my own family. And here's the funny thing is, and this is what I mean by the gardening and spreading it around, and you have a surplus of fathering. Because then I saw your dad a year later, and he picked up the conversation where we had left it off last time. He had remembered everything about it. It was so crazy because it was almost like there was a year gap in between those two conversations. And he started asking me questions like, what happened with this other thing? Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go too much into the conversation, but that's 15 minutes of mentoring right there. 15 minutes, you call what you want: mentoring, fathering, collective parenting, human gardening. You could call it whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't some lecture. It wasn't some, here's my role and here's your role, or any of that. It left me with the sense of, oh, this is a real one. Oh, this is genuine. And what happens when you say that? This is a real one. This is genuine. What you say after that is, because of that, I can trust what he said to me. You can't trust everybody. You can't trust everybody's advice. You can't trust just because people come to your classroom before you to give you some lecture on something that they even care. You can't trust the information that they're giving you. You definitely can trust it for someone who you feel like, oh, this is somebody who cares enough to remember me and know specifically what I was talking about and dealing with. Whatever. Anyways, so Sharif, you don't get to have this conversation because you grew up, with two parents, not just your dad, because your mom was dope like that too, right? And so supportive in a way. It's like unconditional love. It was like unconditional support, and not just to you, because you're spoiled. You got too much of it, right? Like they gave it to everybody else too, right? Anyways, that's
But I mean,
mentorship.
but this, I mean, two things it makes me think of, and it also was a reminder. So I went and spent time with my dad on Sunday. One of the things he brought up was, how's Chris doing? What's Chris up to? Because again, it's a two-way. right? Like it wasn't just what he conversed with you about. You obviously made an impression on him, right? And, for him to, just unsolicited, just bring up like, yeah, how's Chris doing? Tell him I asked about, that kind of thing. And I haven't until today, but it's like, oh, this is dope. Like you brought this up as a reminder. Like, yeah, my dad asked about you. He's thinking about you. You made an impression on him. There's been plenty of times, my father would meet somebody and be like, yeah, that crackpot, that joker. You know what I mean? There's plenty of times where he's just like, nah, that's not, and so like what today the new generation is called be your authentic self. Before we just called it sincerity and being genuine.
But this is what I'll say
right?
too, like that gets contagious. Because now I want to walk away and do that same thing to somebody who's stopping me at one of your events. And every year is one of my favorite events to go to because it's so many Black men in one place. And if you go more than once, you start seeing people repetitively over time. And so that happens for me with your dad. And then I want to be that person to someone else in the exact same way. And then it's contagious. Now it's a chain of mentorship. It's a change of fathering. It's a change of caring that creates a network. Not everything has to be a nonprofit. Not everything has to be a formalized date and time. Not everything has to be a setting. But everything does have to be relational. We are relational people who have been purposely prevented from being relational. As a matter of fact, the machine, what PE would call the anti-nigger machine, has intensely made us consider individualism and rugged individualism as the way to go, not as a life strategy, but as a strategy to keep us away from each other, to ever build anything.
That's a perfect summation of this whole conversation, that mentorship has to be grounded in profound relationship. And I don't mean profound like you've known a person 100 years. I mean just profound that is genuine. There's an ethic of care embedded within it. There's appreciation of you and what you bring to the relationship, right? Like all of that, I think is like that is what mentorship, and often people are lecturing and they think that's mentorship and it's not. You're just giving a lecture. If you're browbeating, that's not necessarily mentorship, it's browbeating. And not to say that there's no time to be firm and direct and all of that. Absolutely. Absolutely that's needed. Like straight talk, being direct, being honest, tough love, all of that. There's a part, but human beings are multifaceted and our relationship should have texture, right? Like, and I've talked about this before in the Islamic tradition. And you reminded me when you talked about Jawanza Kunjufu, who used to be a mainstay at the convenings as well. In Islam, 0 to 7 in a child's age, they are to be treated as royalty.
Wow.
Less royal, like literally they are supposed to be like the kings and queens of the, what America calls that spoiled brat, In Islam, like that's how they should feel. They should feel that they are the center of your world in a lot of different ways. And then 7 to 14 is when they learn self-discipline. This is when you're pouring into them, you're guiding them, you're teaching them, and you're like, hey, here's the straight path. And here's the middle of the straight path where you don't even go. You're right. Like this is where you're pouring in, but self-discipline is a big part of that. And then 14 to 21, they are your vizier, right? They are your advisor. They are like your right hand. They are like informing you about, they've been the center of your world. They have discipline, but now they are almost like your advisor in life as well. And it's part of training, right? It's part of the apprenticeship. It's part of the mentorship. But all of it is facets of growth and development. That's really grounded in also a spiritual sense of this journey of what does it mean to pour into the next generation, and not just impotent love where it's just like, oh, I don't care what you, I just love you. I love. They're like, no, I love you, and you are destined for something even greater. Right. And so that, when you were talking about the phases that Jawanza taught, it reminded me of like, oh, the Islamic traditions of like, oh, this is, my mother and then even my mother used to talk about this a lot. Like, yeah, 0 to 7, 0 to 7, 0. She's talking about that with how we treat our grandkids. and then the next phase, and then the next phase, right? So all that is somebody taught her, right? So a lot of this is, we're passing along, so we got to be careful of what we're passing along. What are we grounded in, and what are we passing along?
So Ish, this is what I do to all y'all all the time as educators. If you had to put this into a scope and sequence, if you had to think about like a weekend retreat on this, what would be the elements that you would put into it? Like if we were going to have a Black men's weekend retreat, what are some things that you think for sure have to be modules in the teaching of this?
Well, definitely number one, grounded in the philosophical concept of, rooted in the African worldview, different views and like, what does that mean to you? The historical context of the situation that we now exist in, how that happened. What does that mean? What are, our ancestors, our personal ancestors, how did they handle situations passed down in the family stories, right? Or the lack of family stories. And what does that mean, right? I would also have, very like vulnerable type of situations where folks are sharing honestly their own racial trauma. And I think sometimes, and Dr. Howard Stevenson does a great job with this. I had a pleasure of sitting through one of his sessions where folks share their racial trauma. And then he has a protocol of measuring the anxiety or what you feel in your chest or in your gut when you're thinking of that moment. And just that powerful moment where you realize, dang, when I was like 7, they said this to me, or I felt this way in this situation, right? And that's real. And every Black man has a story like that. I don't care if you know what I mean? I don't care if you Candace Owens' brother or whatever. I don't know. I don't even know any conservatives off the top of my head right now. But you know what I mean? Like, I would emphasize that, and then I would
conservatives.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to call them conservatives, the fascist, oriented type folk. Yeah. But like, really emphasize what all that means, and then bring in that spiritual aspect, Sharif, like how child development, the psychology, Black psychologists, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Bobby Wright, Naeem Akbar, the list goes down to really think about what this all means and what's our basic spiritual and cultural destiny in the North American wilderness. And those type of conversations, that's what I would emphasize.
What about you, Sharif? Because, I feel like it would be almost great if there was this session at some major event, like, where there's a lot of Black men attending. I can't think of such an event, but, but what would you think is the scope, the sequence, I don't even know those are the right words, but the modules that would have to be in place, just like Ish was just saying, that you think were essential?
Yeah, I think for me, starting off is the same way that we actually designed our Freedom School, that it has to be intergenerational, that it's no one, as you said, like this one person who is the mentor. It's everybody's mentoring the next generation, right? And so in our Freedom Schools, there are high school students mentoring first, second, and third graders. There's college students mentoring high school students and first, second, third graders. There's our staff, veteran educators, who are mentoring college students, high school students, and first, second, and third graders, right? So it's like these, circles that are embedded within circles, and as a community, right? Like we start our day off with one large circle, everybody next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, and speaking towards, the center, right? The center of what's happening, what's the work, what's our collective work, what's our collective responsibility, what's our collective accountability to each other and to ourselves. And so you spoke earlier about the Nguza Saba. So for me, it's that intergenerational piece, which is a natural way for human beings to learn. And then there's the Nguza Saba, which are the values that shape, how human beings act within communities. So to me, the modules those are two pillars of whatever needs to happen. And so, yeah, where that third grader is like, oh yeah, I'm a mentor of a first grader. I'm a mentor of other third graders, but I'm also, people older than me are also saying like, wow, you just taught me something, or I just learned that, or I'm asking you questions about your experiences, right? And I used to say, even as a principal, the most important question I can ask is, how are you experiencing my leadership?
What you just said to me, actually, I think about like Montessori. I think about You guys have heard me talk about the school Ileomade in Oakland, where there was mixed age groups. The math class I sat in, some of the younger kids were actually helping some of the older kids on different concepts, and the math was being taught in a way that was culturally like rooted in their identity. It was different for me sitting in it, but it was just education. It wasn't like some special program. It was just the way that they designed it to be. And you've said that about freedom schools before. Like, you love it to come to a day where we just call them schools, right?
Yeah,
We
Bible
don't call them freedom schools.
talks about that all the time. One day they won't be freedom school; they'll just be schools.
They'll just be schools.
Just how we learn.
So the implications for that are huge right now, because we know we're warehousing our kids in places that aren't even close to that yet. As much as I want to support public education, and I do, but I mean,
freedom schools the only model,
well, listen, I appreciate this conversation a lot. I hope it continues, and we'd love to keep talking to more people as part of our ministry in the world of how we come back to a collective responsibility for Black men who feel healthy enough to do it, and how we arm them with the kind of mental models, the spiritual tools, the whatever it is, that it just becomes part of, just like we said, freedom schools should one day just be schools. Everything we're talking about right now should just be part of Black manhood. It should just be part of the way that we interact. Maybe you do have a child's friend over, and you gaslight him about his mushroom soup. Maybe you do take an interest
encourage.
Maybe you encourage, right? Like, I love gaslighting because I was so gaslit after that. I was like, man, this brother sees something in me, and he gets it. He's important. But anyways, maybe it just becomes part of our style.
Etymology of that term. But
would you say?
I still got to research and really understand the etymology of that term. Like, I just figured it out maybe a year or so ago. Like, okay, this is what they mean by saying it. But I want to go deeper. Like, okay, where did it originate? How did it?
Well, your call out is good, because actually it wasn't gaslighting. Because gaslighting is when somebody messes with you psychologically to believe that you're crazy for believing something. Like, you see the sky as blue, and they question you so hard that you start questioning yourself. Is it really blue? I mean, he's saying it's red,
we used
right?
to say, don't pee on me on my leg and tell me it's raining. Right?
Yes. Yes. But what I would say, the gaslighting in this situation is, it would be very easy to think in a defeatist way, I can't do anything. And what he's doing is gaslighting you out of that sense of like, stop saying that, right? Like, you are a creative brother. And once people, like, I had one mentor once who said that to me after I said something downing of myself. He said, no. You are amongst one of the most creative brothers ever. He just totally reframed everything I was saying about myself. And I swear after that day, I started calling myself creative. I started, like, as an emblem, I am a creative.
Your own self-identity.
And that was a 5-minute mentorship in his case. Stuck with me, but it wasn't a big time out of his day, whatever. So my hope is that we keep this conversation going. And Ish, it sounds like you say that you already give a version of this in the presentations at BMEC.
In pieces, of course. Like, you can't go over everything in a 50-minute session. But like last year, I did educating during times of chaos.
Well, if you were a good teacher, you could. I mean, when you
go over everything like that.
You trying to give me excuses that you can't make it through the content?
It sounds like you're trying to gaslight me, bro.
All right. Well, listen, man, I appreciate y'all as always. Fridays are a little bit of my alchemy and my therapy, because I know that I will get the real conversation from y'all, and the real feedback that will come from a positive place that I can trust, where much of the rest of the week I'm engaged in things that I can't trust. So Freedom Fridays for me works out to be one of those things. Hopefully it's the same for you. And for people listening and watching, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you're freer after this hour of talk with Ish, Sharif, and me. We'll catch you guys next week.